All right, so we're gonna get started here. So we have time to speak with each other and to hear from Tom as he's going to share some things with us today. I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that they're in the Research Universities subgroup here. And what's going to happen is we are going to have some remarks from Tom after I introduce him. And then we want you to be thinking about some of the obstacles that maybe you're seeing on your campuses and maybe some questions that you have. I will be monitoring the chat so we can address your questions after some time. So first of all, welcome to this concurrent session. Our speaker today is Tom Schnaubelt. He's from Stanford University, the Center on Democracy Development and the Rule of Law, which is housed in the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies. Tom joined the CDDRL in August of 2022 and serves as a lecturer and senior advisor on civic education at the Deliberative Democracy Lab. Prior to joining, Tom served as executive director of the Haas Center for Public Service and was the associate vice provost for education. Prior to going to Stanford in 2009, Tom served as the dean for community engagement and civic learning at the University of Wisconsin-Parkside and was a founding executive director of Wisconsin Campus Compact, which is why he is dear to my heart. Tom's work in higher education focuses on democratic engagement, place-based and experiential learning that fosters civic identity, and fostering the capacity to engage constructively across differences. Tom's going to give us some of his remarks on some obstacles facing him and the work at research universities.
All right, thank you, Nicole. And before I do that, I'm going to turn the tables because I want to introduce Nicole. As she said, we have known each other for a long time. And I find it kind of ridiculous that I'm the person talking here because Nicole is a font of wisdom. So I'm going to tell you when we turn it over for questions, it will be both Nicole and I reacting or responding to the questions, and actually we'll invite other people to do the same. This is a pretty small group. But Nicole, she is currently this institutional capacity building director at Campus Compact. And she provides all sorts of resources. And she'll end by talking a little bit about some of the resources that Campus Compact and she in particular has about helping campuses assess the impact of their community engaged scholar work and doing strategic implementation of various community and civic engagement activities. Before starting at Campus Compact, she was the associate director of the Center for Community Engaged Learning at Michigan State University. Most recently, though, I'm really excited about this. Nicole has become the editor-in-chief for the Michigan Journal of Community Service Learning, which is one of the longest-standing journals for work in our field. She's currently pursuing her PhD. She's very close to it. We were just talking before that she's kind of in the final throes of her dissertation in a program at Michigan State University in the College of Education. It's the higher adult and lifelong education program there. Nicole, anybody who's ever talked with Nicole know that she's very interested in the lived experiences of students of color and how those things influence their own civic learning, particularly in service learning courses. So she is very much an advocate of figuring out how do we build models that are not based on the charity model and using sort of basically a lot of qualitative and quantitative assessments and employing critical race theory lens to the work that we do. And I'm just really pleased to have been a colleague of Nicole's for many years. I would maybe, since it's such a small group, could we do a quick kind of go around so we know who's on the call and what institutions people are from? Because I can see the names, but I'm interested to see like who's where. And I'll just do kind of Paul, I'll ask you to go, and then Jenny, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you. My name is Paul Brown, and I'm an associate clinical professor and the director of the Civic Innovation Center at the University of Maryland, College Park School of Public Policy.
Great. And Jenny, and then Karen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Gallagher. I oversee the general education program at Virginia Tech.
Great. Karen and then Teresa.
Hi, I'm Karen McTighe-Musel. I worked at AAC&U for the last 30 years, but have retired under COVID, and I am now involved as a senior educational advisor to this CLDE coalition. And most of my work at AAC&U was not involved with research universities, but that's the only kind I went to as an undergraduate and a graduate student.
Ah, okay. Teresa, and then Donna.
Teresa Spaeth. I'm with the University of Minnesota up in Crookston, and I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives and also the chair of the Vadine Center for Rural Engagement. So I primarily work on the bridge between our R1 institution and a regional university and how we apply that research in rural settings.
So Teresa, did you say a center on rural engagement?
Yes.
Oh, we've got a whole nother conversation that you and I have to have. Donna's just going to get something from her refrigerator. So, oh, she's back.
No, I had to
Okay.
turn something on the stove. Hi, everybody.
Go ahead.
I'm Donna Chambers. I'm from Penn State Berks, which is one of the campuses of Penn State University. I am an associate teaching professor in Spanish. I'm also the coordinator for our Office of Community Engagement.
Great. All right. Well, Meg and then Veronica, I think will round it off.
My name is Meg Worm. I am a graduate career and academic advisor at George Washington University, working at the Elliott School of International Affairs.
Great. Veronica?
My name is Veronica Kulan. I am, and you're probably going to wonder why I'm here, the grant writer in the Office of Research, but I'm over the institutional and DEI initiatives, and I also work under the Chief Diversity Officer.
Well, thank you. And I'm not wondering why you're here. You're here because you want to be here. And that's a good thing. I will say I'm sort of the opposite of Karen. I didn't go to research one institution. I went to the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point, which is a public regional comprehensive institution. And in terms of like my background, my entire career has been spent in public higher education until about 14 years ago when I came to Stanford. So this was quite a different experience for me in many different ways. What I'm planning to do, and I see someone just joined us, Maria. It looks like, would you like to introduce yourself, Maria? Just tell your role in your institution. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. Good afternoon. My name is Maria Alejandro, and I'm the director of at the University of Texas at San Antonio, the Office of Civic and Community Engaged Learning.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you everybody for being here. What Nicole and I plan to do is I'm going to share just a few comments and thoughts about the topic, which is sort of advice on civic learning at research institutions, how to overcome some obstacles. And during that time, we're inviting you to sort of either share in the chat or share directly with Nicole any questions that you have. But I'm hoping that maybe while I go through this, it might spawn or spur some questions or other thoughts. And so I'll share some things, and then we'll just kind of open it up for a conversation. I want to start by just saying, giving two caveats, really. It's the first is which they're both around the title of this session, overcoming obstacles, including all students, practical advice from institutions where civic learning is now a signature. First of all, I'm not speaking for the institution of Stanford. I just want to say you're not getting advice from Stanford. You're just getting advice from Tom. And second of all, I just want to say, I moved from UW, University of Wisconsin Parkside to Stanford. I would not have, I do not want to convey that civic learning is now signature at Stanford. We get some things done, but to be honest with you, I am always in awe at things that I'm learning from either two-year schools or public regional comprehensive schools that are really, embedded and anchored into their communities in different ways than many of our research institutions do. So I just want to lay that out there as a point of humility and like that we could do a lot of things better here. I don't know that I would say it's signature. That being said, I want to share a few preliminary thoughts about some things that we have done all of you know that there's not really one university when you're at a large university. There's sort of pockets of universities, and there's multiple universities within the university. And I want to talk to, I'm going to share several things, but I want to start with sort of the central challenges as I see them at research institutions. And one is decentralization. You know, when I came to Stanford, I remember distinctly being involved in a program. It was like a leadership program that was meant to connect people. And a colleague of mine actually said to me that he had been here a year before he understood or knew that he had a person who was reporting to them. He didn't even know that because the place was so decentralized. And it is true. I think I used to think, well, it's a very decentralized place when I was at UW Parkside, and I came here and it was all a totally different kettle of fish, so to speak. The second piece of the central challenges around universities, research universities in particular, is the reward structures that are, and I know I'm not telling anybody anything they don't know here. The reward structures are so aligned with the research focus, research purpose of the institution, and that's one that we often kind of butt up against. And thirdly, leadership. And this is probably something that I came to more recently, but I've always thought, well, the college president and the provost, they don't really set the stage for such a large institution. But I am living through like a very dramatic change and shift between one administration and another one. And I'm seeing actually that there is a lot of power, both pro and con, in sort of the leaders that you have at your institutions. Now, the last thing I want to say around these sort of central challenges is that I view them as both cultural, and that means like that these are challenges that where the culture is really the underlying beliefs, the assumptions, the values, and the ways of interacting that contribute to this unique social and psychological environment of your institution. But they're also strategic and structural, and these are how things get organized, how communication happens at your institution, and what things get the resources, where they put the cat food, so to speak. The cultural and the strategic and structural are actually obviously interconnected. They interact with each other. And my experience has been, and I don't know if the others have found this, but I really feel that culture will always eat strategy for breakfast. And it doesn't mean that you can't make things happen and impact culture through strategy and structure, but there's always a lot of momentum around the cultural pieces, especially at large institutions that take a lot of time to create change. Now, three things that I've been involved with at Stanford. I've been here for about 14 years, and I'll share three sort of initiatives or pieces that I think all of which have sort of institution-wide impacts. The first is an initiative that we launched in 2015 called Cardinal Service. The second is something that if you went to the first forum that was hosted, you may have heard about it. It's the new first year course sequence called College at Stanford, which is basically really it's a remarkable change for us because ultimately every student will go through the same sequence of first year courses. I will say that I am not, in terms of that one, I wasn't involved on the planning or implementation stage, but I am an instructor for that course, the second quarter course called Citizenship in the 21st Century. So I can speak a little bit to how that's actually, not so much to how it actually evolved and came about, but I can speak to what's happening to it now. And the third thing is the Stanford Democracy Initiative, which I'm currently involved with in the first year of that particular initiative. So I'll take each of these and then I'll just kind of map out a few lessons, things that I think are important to know. So Cardinal Service actually evolved, and I will say it's sort of, Cardinal Service is the experiential part that we all seek to engage students in community initiatives. It's at Stanford, they have had the Haas Center for Public Service since 1985. I'm not good at math, but it started in 1985, and when I got here, there was a tremendous array of programs that were basically engaging students in public service activities.
That says St. Boniface.
Fred, thanks, Fred. when I got here, there was a tremendous sort of number and great programs that were operating out of the Haas Center. But it was one of the things that got commonly shared with me is that people would say things like, the Haas Center is the best kept secret at Stanford. And that used to drive me a little batty because I was like, I don't want it to be a best kept secret. In fact, I think we have a lot of work to do to kind of push against some of the sort of cultural norms around and even the identity of Stanford, which is, you know, tech focused entrepreneurship, you know, innovation, all that. And we wanted to elevate that work so that it would be infecting the entire institution. So what we ended up doing was we took what we called a networked approach. We basically decentered the center and started asking around the campus. First of all, we came up with a shared language and framework that everybody in the whole everybody around campus could see themselves in at least one piece of this. And the framework was really around something we call cardinal courses, which are basically service learning courses. We had Cardinal Quarter, which is the public service internships. We had Cardinal Commitment, which is the sort of year-long commitment that we were hoping students would make. And then we had Cardinal Careers, which is, okay, how do we unveil or how do we give students a brighter runway for them to make decisions about how they're going to be in public service after they leave Stanford? The whole idea here was to try to make public service and civic engagement inescapable through this networked approach. So it wasn't just the Haas Center actually acting out these internships or the courses or the doing the commitments. It was happening all over campus. So at one point, I think we had 56 departments that were offering Cardinal Quarters from around campus. So the two really important messages about the lessons from Cardinal Service I would share with you is one, language really matters. And I'm not a communications person. I'm not huge into marketing, that kind of thing, but having a simple way of talking about that work was so impactful. And actually, like, one of the simple things was faculty would almost universally turn away from us, or at least the eyes would roll to the back of their heads when we would say words like service learning. But changing it to just calling it a cardinal course mattered, because people were like, what's a cardinal course? And then you could actually talk to them about what a service learning course is without having to sort of go into a bunch of educational jargon. The second thing, and this is a little later lesson, is that at a research institution, we found it really helpful to focus on starting with research. Like, actually, my entire career, I would almost always say, let's get faculty engaged in teaching and learning in the community, and then maybe that'll affect their research. And with the Cardinal Service thing, what we started to find out is, no, it's a better entry point to engage them in community-based research, and then move to the teaching and learning. We found most faculty were a little bit more receptive to working in that direction. So the second thing that I mentioned is the college course. So this is the new, this is the second sort of university-wide thing that we've been working on here at Stanford. And the college course is actually a 3-sequence course. The first quarter is really around how to be in college. It's called Why College, and it's kind of like an entry to college level work. Many of your campuses probably have courses like this, where it's kind of an introduction to, studying and sort of what to expect when you come to college. The second quarter is called Citizenship in the 21st Century. And it's really, and we take a very broad definition. I know citizenship can be such a fraught word, but we're using it to describe how we make group decisions in a democracy, in any small group that you're involved in and community that you're involved in. So that's the second quarter, and it's largely drawing upon political philosophy, both from the past and the more contemporary. And then the third quarter actually continues that conversation, but does so in a global context. So exploring the kind of notions of global citizenship. This is a course that's basically in its sort of second stage. Right now, students have to take 2 out of 3 of these courses, and they're currently scaling the number of instructors that are teaching these courses. The committee, there's a whole committee that works on creating the content for each of the courses. The lesson I would say here about this course that is actually, I think, one of the probably unintended, maybe it was intended, I'm not sure, I wasn't there when they created it, but I would say that one of the really interesting and vital things around this has been the interdisciplinary teaching pods that they've created. So they've recruited faculty from across the university to teach in the seminar, because each of the seminars is held to about 15 students. There's 1,000 students in these classes, so you can imagine how many people they had to recruit to do this. But they gather these faculty, and my teaching pod meets on Fridays. And I have to say, some of those conversations have been the best conversations about teaching around civic engagement that I've been a part of in my entire career. I'm learning so much from different people who, like at the School of Engineering, have a different way of speaking about this work, but it's still relevant to what the class is doing, and I'm learning a lot from it. So the third thing that I will tell you about that may bring up some questions, or where's the obstacles, is the thing that I started this past fall. It's called the Stanford Democracy Initiative, and really what this is very akin to, I don't know if some of you I know some of you have been around for a while and know of the rubrics that like Andy Furco and Barbara Holland, and you may know the Carnegie classification around community engagement. We're doing something very similar to that, but we're actually focusing it completely on activities that advance democracy. Now, this particular thing came up because Mike McFall, who's the former ambassador to Russia, was having a conversation with some donors and some board of trustee members, and this was pre the election, and they were saying, look, what are we doing at Stanford to advance democracy? And Mike didn't have a good answer to that. Mike is also the director of the Freedman Spogli Institute. And so they basically said, listen, we have to do an inventory to sort of know what are we doing around campus. This goes back to the whole decentralization thing. There's so much stuff that's happening, but the right hand doesn't really know what the left hand is doing. Now, and through a short series of events, I ended up somehow directing this program. Now, the first thing I did was did a quick scan and found out that Johns Hopkins University did a very similar thing that we were proposing. So I want to just give some props to the people at Johns Hopkins, particularly the folks at SNF and Gore Institute, for their groundbreaking work around this. I am gonna share my screen real quick because I want to show you sort of what we're starting with. Whoops. So this is, I'm going to share this, actually, hopefully you can see it. Let me do this. Yeah, okay. So what we're doing is, what we're currently doing, and again, this is very much like those assessment activities that we've done for service learning or community and civic engagement activities, but it's more focused on the democracy advancing activities. We're basically splitting things up into three categories, and the three categories were adapted from what Johns Hopkins gave us. The first type is we're looking for activities that just simply advance democracy, and they are expressly and directly about democracy, its theory, its principles, and institutions. The second type is what we're calling and what they call democracy adjacent activities, and we're looking at, we're focusing on either efforts that are around civil society, like the non-governmental work, or on working on specific or particular social issues. But it's really important that the implications in that research or in the courses or in the engagement activities, that they're very, their implications to the political and democratic processes or the institutions are both intentional and explicit. So in other words, it can't just be research on global climate change, because that is too broad a net for us. But it could be research on global climate change and how it's impacting voting patterns in Sri Lanka. Like, so that's just kind of one example of how we would kind of narrow that. And then the third set of activities that we're looking at are things that are really purposefully as a core effort, teaching, drawing out, deepening knowledge, and engaging community members in values and skills that are essential to democratic citizenship. So that's the top row, and those are the sort of three categories of work that we're looking for. the side row, the side column there, you see coursework, research, democratic engagement, and scholars, practitioners. Honestly, we've just only recently added the scholars and practitioners, but we were really just taking and looking at each of these types and then looking at all the coursework. We've got the 16,000 courses on a big database that Stanford actually offers, and we're combing through them to identify which courses fit in one or more of these types. Same thing with research. We're going through and looking at the research. We've got a small student research team that's helping us out here. And then the democratic engagement activities. So these are the things that would look a lot like what we did at the Haas Center, or if you're in a public service or a service learning center, some of the work there might be there. And then finally, the scholars and practitioners piece, we just realized as we were doing this, we want to actually kind of have a database of people who are either scholars or practitioners that are really focused and central to this work. So, and a lot of them are obviously going to be doing work in the other three categories. Now I can't seem to figure out how to, I'm going to stop sharing because, yeah, okay. So that's the work that we're currently doing. And just so you kind of round this off, what we're planning to do, and I hope you can kind of get a sense of we're actually kind of taking the networked approach, just like we did with Cardinal Service as well, where we've got basically project advisors from all over campus. There's 49 of them right now, both faculty, students, staff from across campus that are really helping us with this analysis. We're going to be doing an analysis that's basically trying to find where are the exemplars of this work, things that need to be expanded, where are the gaps, where are we not doing things that we ought to be doing, and then where are the opportunities for either collaboration or innovation, what kinds of things need to be launched. I'll leave you with, as I stop here, I think the most important part of all of this work at a research institution, kind of going back to the decentralization, the leadership, the pieces that I was mentioning at the very beginning and the reward structures, all of those pieces come into play, but at the fundamental level, what we're doing, and I think of this work a lot as sort of academic community organizing. And we are very much trying to organize within a rarefied environment and getting a lot of people who are rowing in the same direction, actually rowing together for this project. So hopefully that sparked some questions. I have not been looking at the, oh, thanks, Bobby's here. Great, and you added the report to Johns Hopkins. All right, so we've got, I don't see any questions from you all. That either means you were in rapt attention and could not possibly be thinking of good questions while I was unloading all of this font of wisdom, or it means that you haven't been listening, and we need to sort of turn to, like, what kinds of questions do you want to have a conversation about now?
Hi, I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I think I can say ditto. A lot of what you say is happening right here at Penn State. So, you know, we're 20 different campuses, so that makes it even more decentralized. And I think the biggest thing, like you said, is the rewards. A lot of people won't buy into this because it doesn't count toward tenure and all that kind of thing. So, I mean, ditto, ditto, ditto. So I would love if we could talk about solving that. That would be great.
Yeah, well, one hint about that, Donna, that I mentioned before is that starting with research as opposed to other things, with engagement, and I will say this kind of goes back to what I was saying about the culture and strategy. We're dealing with a 2,000-year-old culture, not really 2,000-year-old culture, but the culture of universities is such that actually, that's not true. It's sort of post World War II where this culture has really come into play, about the research pieces of it. And so I think I don't want to be a Don Quixote, you know, kind of going against the windmill. I think there's room to do a little bit of work around the reward structure, but I think you almost have to use the reward structure against itself here. And maybe you'll accuse me of being an incrementalist, but I just don't really see, at least the institution that I'm currently in, changing like its reward structure in any period of time within my lifetime. Maybe I just don't see that happening. I'll probably betray some of my community engagement background too, by saying I actually think that there's too much homogeneity within higher education, and I think there is a place for research institutions, and they're approaching things a little bit differently. I was saying at the very beginning that I think we can often look to other universities or colleges for really great models for community engagement, and set them up as small pieces within a larger university. It doesn't have to be the overarching university doing everything in alignment with each other. We have some really great anchor institution type stuff at Stanford, but it's not infused throughout the entire institution. It's different pockets of it, but that doesn't mean the work that they're doing in community is any less engaged than, you know, a smaller school embedded in a smaller community where everything is around that one project or that one networked collective action kind of initiative. I don't know if other people have thoughts about that. I may have thrown out some fairly provocative things for people to think about. Karen,
you have your hand
I'll
raised?
go ahead and comment that what you discovered about, I mean, I think we have to learn, we have to share a common language somewhere, and to allow how we talk about what we're doing to reflect multiple voices. So that's kind of a lesson about diversity. And when I remember when I went to Elon College to speak, and the president brought together 24 people in a room to talk, who were all involved in service learning. That was the language. And they have a very vibrant program and a very vibrant center. And as people went around and described what they did, the scientist was describing how she takes students out and they measure the trees and the effect of the climate on the trees and whether they're flourishing or not flourishing. And she turns to the service learning director and says, she calls it service learning, I call it good science. So in science, wherever you are, they probably aren't going to use the word service. What is the language they use? And so to let the, and in the work on the major, and I'm actually going to suggest this as a strategy at Stanford, that letting the disciplines really look at those places that are the intellectual spaces in their disciplines for posing the big questions that you have on your chart, or that the coalition has offered as a framework. They're going to come up out of that discipline in some ways that make sense to the discipline, the pedagogies, the methodologies, the kind of social issues they do or don't attend to. And in the first meeting, this is the last thing I'll say, and then I'll quiet down. In the first meeting, when we were coming together to find a framework for what kind of questions to ask within the major that resulted in civic prompts, making civic learning routine across the disciplines, people looked at the long list of outcomes in knowledge, skills, values, and action that Crucible Moment had compiled from a lot of what people had told them from across the country. And there were two insights. The scientists realized that they did a lot of action, they did a lot of knowledge, they did a lot of practical skills, and they never touched values, or they rarely touched values, which made them very uneasy. I, in English and the humanities cluster, we did a lot with values, knowledge, and practical skills, and we almost never touched action as part of our routine way of doing our discipline. So all of us felt not called to radically alter our disciplines, but to be aware that it had a big gap, that you should be worried that you're not raising any values in science, and you should be worried, and the scientists were actually, and we in the humanities said, we really have to give students practical sense of how to apply all this learning in the world to make it a better place and a better democracy and a more just one.
Yeah, well, just to double down on the language tricks and the shared language, at least, the thing that we found here is that we would go across campus to the School of Engineering and talk to them about reflection, and they had no idea what we were talking about. they don't do reflection, they do analysis. And and this was the person who was our director for community engaged learning, who was focused on the college or the school of engineering, came back and said, I can't use this stuff from Haas that's got this language about like reflection. So there is a good bit of code switching that happens. I would be remiss too if I didn't, in terms of the shared language. This has been a kind of a big thing for me in this field, because I feel like, let me put field in quotes, air quotes, because I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we get there until we have a shared language that's actually shared across institutions enough that we are actually able to sort of do some research around this work, where it's not like, well, I'm not sure if what you're doing is actually the same thing of what we're doing. And so one of the things that we did, and is now, I'm really thrilled that Campus Compact has this, is the Pathways of Public Service and Civic Engagement, where it's looking at 6 different social change levers. Those of you that have been around for a while, and I see some folks who have been around for a while, know that the Minnesota Campus Compact had a social change wheel, and it had like 36 different things on it. This is actually a little bit of a distillation into a broader typologies. The other connection point that I want to make is that the Michigan Journal for Community Service Learning is going to use these. They've got a special edition that's coming out around civic identity development, and a lot of these pathways will be drawn upon by different submitters, the people who are submitting their articles that focus on civic identity development, and how these different pathways actually connect and actually develop those capacities. So anyway, I think that the shared language and frameworks across institutions is really important, but this is a little bit ancillary, because what we're talking about right now is how do we do this even within one large research institution. I will tell you that many people, when we've got a group that has been evolving. It's basically a working group. It's about 40 institutions strong that use the pathways and its associated survey. And one of the things they found was just having a group that's actually doing that kind of research on social change education has been super helpful for folks to kind of get legitimacy of like, hey, there's a whole group of people that are looking at this. How do people actually become civic change agents in really positive ways? So, Nicole, I promised to let you get in here, and I want to hear like anything that you've got by way of advice about the language or the reward structure question that we've been talking about. We haven't really touched much on the reward structure.
Well, 2 things. I wanted just to bring attention to what Nirja put in the chat about an article that was posted in the Joey, that was published in Joey. And also to talk about, and I know I was going to talk about some of this at the end, but one of the things that I talk about with folks, especially when I do things like civic action planning, which is really helping institutions of all types like figure out how they're going to sort of all row in the same direction, is, you have to get people from all parts of your institution. I'm working with an institution right now that is supposed to have 16 people on there, and they're not an R1, but they're supposed to have 16 people on their academic service learning board, and they have 6. So they're supposed to have one person, right, represented. It's like, from faculty senate, and all the words are there, but the action isn't there. And so they're starting to think about what are the ways in which they can use something like a civic action plan, even the 6 of them, to get them to a point where there's more buy-in, and they can start addressing some of these things that might bring the full 16 people in, because we're realizing that you're not going to get a common language when not everyone's in the room. And that's part of the complication. The same goes for when I was at Michigan State, right? Like, we wouldn't publish, they have since I've left. I was not the barrier. I just want to be clear, even though it happened after I left. We would not publish a definition of service learning or community engagement on our service learning website, because we didn't want to make it too narrow or have other people not see themselves in it. And I think what happened after I left is that there was time for people, especially during COVID, to sit and talk about, let's get people together in the same room virtually and figure out what is that definition that we can agree upon, and then post that. But what happens, as you all know, is we're all running in so many different directions, trying to get promotion, trying to get tenure, doing our research, doing our teaching, and no one had time to come together and come up with a definition. So I was very excited when they did that. But really, it's just it's trying to get as many people in the room together as possible, including your DEI folks. I don't know where if she's still here, but that's one of the big things, is we're really trying to get people to start including others in this conversation that maybe we hadn't included in the past. And I'm going to throw a link to the civic action planning in the chat real quick.
Well, one thing I will say, so Stanford is not classified as the community engagement classification for Carnegie. And I'm going to lean on maybe a little bit on the leadership piece. I don't know that I've wanted us to do that, but I have not been able to get the provost to give us the green light to go ahead and do it. And I don't want to get the classification. I never wanted to get the classification because it's, like here we've got the classification, but I wanted to do it because I felt that it had a good structure for having a conversation about the things that we needed to talk about. So I just want to put a plug out there for any process that either internal or external that allows you to have conversations about things like the reward structure. That's the thing I liked about the Carnegie thing. And I think it's also, interestingly, one of the reasons why the provost wasn't willing to let us go through it, because we probably wouldn't be able to meet the reward structure pieces that were articulated there. There's also some weird stuff about Stanford not wanting to go through credentialing or like extra accreditation pieces voluntarily, but that's a whole different story. But I do think, and that's one of the things about this democracy initiative that I'm leading right now, is I'm certainly not framing it as an accreditation process, but I'm using that sort of like process of getting people having in rooms and having conversations about what are we doing to advance democracy and what does that look like, and what should it look like. So that's what I meant by sort of the organizing, doing community organizing within large institutions. And the other thing, I'll just go back. I think I might be overly influenced by my dissertation, because I studied, this is back in like the late 90s. I studied institutions that had actually things like specifically they were using Ernest Boyer's sort of scholarship of engagement and actually referencing it in their P&T documents. And I remember very vividly a faculty conversation. I had a faculty interview, and the faculty member said, it doesn't really matter what's in those P&T documents. What really matters is the 7 people around the table making the decision about tenure. And that's what I mean about the structures and systems. There's an interplay between those things. So you have to kind of work jointly at changing those structures and the P&T guidelines, but you also have to change the culture at the institution. And that's really tricky, and that's slow, and it's methodical. We talk to students about being a part of like long planned sort of social change. That's kind of what we've been up to in this field, in higher education reform. What are some of the obstacles that you might be facing at your institution, or what do you see as the chief obstacle to more firmly embedding this work in your institution?
This is Teresa in Crookston. One of the struggles we have, and we work with Andy Furco quite a bit. We just designed a new program for adult returners to create socially responsible citizens going back to school. But one of the problems I'm struggling with is faculty seeing the value of doing this work. Like we're in the process of our Carnegie classification application, and they keep saying, well, if we do all this work, what's the value of getting that designation? Or, like you said, it's not just about the P&T, but it's there's a lot of like, what's the overarching value to the institution and specifically to the discipline? And we haven't really come up with a good way to overcome that, if you know what I mean, other than to say, at this point, it's an initiative of our president that all of our system campuses are designated Carnegie engaged.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, one of the benefits to your institution, just hearing what you just said, would be who wants to be the only one that isn't? Honestly, like you're going to be looking pretty silly if you don't have it there, if everybody else is moving forward on it. But I honestly, I don't have a good answer for you other than what I've been saying at this campus, which is it's the process. It's the process. It's like having a conversation and internally looking at ourselves. If a whole group of people and a whole group of educational leaders in higher education have said, this is what it means to be deeply engaged in community and to be a campus that is like on the forefront of that, I would think that even if you didn't get the if you went through the process and didn't get it, your campus and your students and your communities would hopefully benefit in the end from having had sort of like, hey, we're looking at this in a structured and rational way, and we're gonna, you might learn some things. So I wouldn't focus on the actual like, here's the credential that we're going to put on our wall or cite on our website. I would really double down on like, hey, it's really about the process of learning as a community and as an institution, where we're doing really well and some things that we want to do better.
That's certainly true. And one thing, just a caveat that we think is interesting, and Andy Furco and I just submitted a research proposal for this. When I think there's an advantage to being an R1, or in our case, a regional connected to the R1, and that there's a little more credibility when you can build into a research component into what you're doing and into your engaged strategies. And one thing that we did notice is we held focus groups across rural Minnesota for the past year. And then we use qualitative methods to actually analyze, instead of just saying, this is what we heard, we use qualitative methods and software and all of that to really truly dig down and analyze what was going on. And we work with rural employers, and some of them are quite large, like Sunnis Harvest States and Land O'Lakes, food companies in particular, because we asked specifically about their rural employment. And one thing that we found very interesting was a term that was used by one of the companies was load-bearing members of society. And what we found that they were looking for in terms of competencies, which makes this work all the more important, is that they want, when they're in rural communities, they want people who want to become members of that rural community or stay in that rural community and kind of move up the chain, if you will, in their organizations. But they need to be civically engaged because, as you know, small rural communities depend on this, right? They depend on people who engage in society and do their role. And so it's very interesting to us that they are supporting some of the work that we're doing really substantially in terms of promising employment and promising students and things like that for adult returners. And they really wanted this component of social work, like social democracy, a community engaged project. And even more interesting, just an anecdote, is they have this ESG, they have to do these ESG reports every year about their social responsibility. So the stories of these students eventually will become part of that ESG reporting for them, which is just, those are just surprising things. We're just pulling the string to say, does that increase retention? Does that do something? Because we just launched the pilot program this like fall semester, but it's interesting in building a research enterprise around, is this satisfying employer needs, and is it increasing retention and graduation of students? Is, I think, a value of R1s that other like regionals don't necessarily have or think about. So just a comment in addition to my
that's
struggles.
fascinating. No, that's fascinating, because I mean, I when I moved from Parkside to here, retention just went out the window in terms of a word that we even used around like justifying this. Like it's just interesting how the different spaces. I will tell you, sorry, this is going to be a bit of a tangent. One of my big projects at Stanford has been for the past 6 years. In 2018, we did an analysis of the 582 cardinal quarters we had students take, like where they were doing a public service internship. Guess how many out of the 582 internships where it was a student from an urban area who grew up in an urban area who went to a rural place. Guess how many out of 582?
50, maybe one. See,
One. And this is, so we have only 4% of our students actually hail from rural places in the country. 19% of America lives in rural places. When we talk about that, like urban rural divide as one of the existential divides, it's fascinating. And actually there's such a misinformation. Like people think that, oh, rural places are, you know, homogeneously white. That's not true. And it's like, it's been a fascinating little ride for us here. There's actually a young woman who's at the University of Michigan right now who's writing a dissertation on some of this that is just super fascinating. She used to work at the, yeah. Anyway, sorry, that's a bit of a tangent.
But I would love to see that work. If I could be connected, I would love to, because, you know, we're really wrestling with this right now, as not just in Minnesota, but how do we look at this as a whole? Because some of those companies that are larger, that are rural employers, are saying, hey, it's not just about Minnesota, it's about everybody, right?
Yeah. Teresa, I just put my email.
We're in the process of, currently we're planning our community engaged capstone, which it's a 12, right now we have what we call the onboarding 21 credit hour program, and the capstone is a community engaged project. So now we're trying to figure out what that looks like. We launched the pilot, we have the student learning objectives, but in practical application, how do you create a meaningful experience directly in their rural community when they're dispersed everywhere? Do you know what I mean? Like we've got 16 individuals dispersed all across the state. And now we're trying to say, how are we going to manage those publicly engaged, you know, those community engaged projects in a meaningful way? So it's just interesting. If anybody has ideas, I'm open to suggestions, because we're trying to figure, it was easier said than done, right?
Yeah. Teresa, I threw my email into your, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to say to Teresa, you know, that you just described in your research project a wonderful argument for why the classification is critical. Because where you are, what the employers want matters hugely to the students who come to your university, and many of them are going to stay there. And if those employers are saying they want the very things that are outcomes in a Carnegie classification, you've really you know, got terrific arguments. So tie the findings of those research to say this is it, and you know, as Tom said, the idea of retention, both attention and recruitment, you know, these are they will keep us going, you know, attracting students who come here in order that they can leave with things employers want and that are good for the area they grew up in and are good for Minnesota and are good for democracy, because it means, you know, that it builds stronger communities. So I just didn't want you to lose that as an argument for the class.
Thank you. I'm taking notes, believe me, profusely here, because it's a lot to take in. You know what I mean?
Well, Nicole, you already put one of the resources there, even though it wasn't probably one you thought you were going to list on this particular call. But do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the resources that Compact has, or do you have any other thoughts you want to share on the call here?
Sure. So I was throwing some things in the chat, but also the other thing I want to say before we run out of time is Campus Compact is part of this affinity networks that we have. One of them is called Truckin. It is spelled Trucen. So newbies always call it Trucen. I wasn't there when they created the name. But we are having a meeting in March in Minnesota at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. And let me just put this link in.
Ironically, my Zoom just before this was with Heidi Baraha, and we were talking about the
and we just welcome people to think about this, and if you are a Campus Compact member, to join the conversation. As I was talking to Tom about earlier, this is really what I wanted to say to people, is that you're not alone. There are a group of people in this room who are all facing similar obstacles, whether you are, you know, in an R1, whether you are connected to an R1, this is a conversation that's been happening for a while. I was fortunate to start my career at Michigan State University, and for a variety of reasons. And one of them was I walked into, working at the longest running community engagement center in the country. There's some debate about that, Nirja, I think maybe, yeah. We're not going to have that Michigan debate here, but there was some comfort in that. And so I grew up in an environment where the conversations that we were having were these tough conversations. The other thing I want to say about language is something that is part of the conversation that's happening specifically in R1s, is what is the language that we are using? Service learning may not resonate where you are. Community engaged learning may or may not resonate where you are. What's important in all of these conversations is that the actions back up the language. So for us, and this is a Michigan State thing, we changed our center from the Center for Service Learning and Civic Engagement to the Center for Community Engaged Learning because of the ways in which that leads us toward an engagement solidarity path. Many of the ways in which they were interacting with each other did not change. And so as you're thinking about finding that shared framework, make sure that shared framework also has actions to back it up, because that's where it becomes important, especially in diversity, inclusion, retention, all of those things. Yeah, that's really the thing I want to hit home, is that you have to think about who's being impacted and can you follow up with that. We have 2 minutes left, and so I want to make sure we open it up for any closing words that Tom has, or for anyone else who hasn't spoken and would like a space, because after this, they're asking you to go back to the main room for a closing, I think. Karen, is it a closing? It's another plenary.
Yes.
Sorry, my brain. So any closing thoughts? Nirja, are you saying something? Because you keep unmuting.
I know. I was like, it's not a closing thought. I feel like I'm just going to throw in a thing, and then we won't have any time to talk about it. So that's fine. But just in terms of like challenges, I think for us, it's on our campus, it's really that there are so many players now that are in democratic engagement and civic learning. And it is about rowing together, but it's even getting them all to believe they need to listen to each other. There's a lot of like jockeying for position or resources. And so that's half the navigation, right? Getting everybody to agree that actually working towards similar aims with different, mechanisms is the first step. And we're still working on that. So we have a coalition on campus, and it's still quite a lot to navigate. So that's all. Like I said, I just wanted to blow it up and be like, good luck, everyone. It's really great, but you're not alone. That's all I want to say too.
Okay.
Yeah, that plus one to that everything's changed in the last 25 years, where you might have been the what was the Ginsburg Center before? It was the Office of Community Service Learning way back then, and now it's this. Is that your new building? Beautiful.
Yes. Yeah, wow. It's not there yet. It's all just a dream right now. But in 2 years, this
will be okay. Yeah. But beyond that, you're right. Like there's so much happening at different campuses. And I will say that is where the language and the leadership really come into play, where, and that's why it's also, you kind of have to be a little bit of an organizer. We should all take a page out of Marshall Ganz's book about community organizing and the power of us, the story of us. So anyway, it's been a pleasure. I hope this is helpful. And Nicole, it's always great to work with you. I'm thrilled that they paired us together. It's good to have an opportunity to see you again.
Yeah, it's been great. So for all of you, the next session starts at 4:15. Just go back to the main session and the main page, and you should be able to hop into that session. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.